A man named Hal Nickle has proposed a ballot initiative in California that sounds initially like it's intended to make presidential elections in the state more modern, more democratic, but it would, in fact, make presidential elections nationwide almost meaningless if it's allowed to pass. Now, what it would do is it would make the electoral votes of California be distributed proportionally based on the popular vote in the state. I apologize if that sounds somewhat arcane. The basic idea is that in the vast majority of cases in America, the winner of the popular vote in that state receives all of its electoral votes. Now, there are two exceptions. Maine and Nebraska do their system in a slightly different way. The winners of each congressional district get those votes. But right now, the balance in terms of Democrats and Republicans and how they get their electoral votes in presidential elections, it's a very fine balance that's being maintained using a combination of incredibly arcane electoral rules and procedures. And now if this was to happen, and you were to distribute the electoral votes proportionally based on the popular vote, back in 2012, Mitt Romney would have received 20 electoral votes. That would be a swing of 40 votes from the Democrat to the Republican. And if this is allowed to happen, if this ballot initiative passes, it could make it almost impossible for Democrats to win a presidential election nationally.
See, this is what I'm talking about with Republican lies, right? So, for example, in the healthcare debate, they say, oh, we just want you to be able to buy insurance from any state because that'll increase the competition. That sounds so good. That sounds like, yeah, that. No, the real reason they want to be able to do that is because then all the companies would go to the state with the least amount of regulations. Yeah. So they could then hoodwink you with like almost no regulations to stop them, right? And Republicans, it's not like they don't know that. They do know that. They lie on purpose about competition when they don't mean that at all. And it's the same thing in this case. It sounds so good. If you're in California, wait a minute now, why should one person get all the, electoral votes when the other guy got so many votes and those are going to waste? And you go, oh yeah, turns out they're for democracy. Yeah, sign me up. No, but they don't do that in the red states. They're not proposing that in Texas. Well, they're not proposing it in Oklahoma.
Yeah, we can show you some of that. And by the way, this isn't just Hal Nickle of California. Reince Priebus, the Republican National Committee chair, said it's something that a lot of states that have been consistently blue, that are fully controlled red, ought to be looking at. And what he's saying there is that there's many cases of states who the popular vote would go Democratic, but because of funding coming from outside of states, the state legislatures of many of these states have actually been controlled by Republicans traditionally. Now, what makes it a bad idea is not that in some sense it's not more democratic. It does, as you said, it seems to make some sort of sense. But also, as you said, they're not proposing it in all states. Oklahoma, for instance, 7 electoral votes currently. They're not proposing it in Oklahoma. All 7 of those votes go to a Republican who wins the popular vote there, although there are many Democrats in Oklahoma. Similarly, South Carolina, 9 votes will continue to go towards Republicans because they're not going to make it proportional in South Carolina, despite the fact that many Democrats live in South Carolina. Texas also, 38 electoral votes, increasingly Democratic. In fact, many people expect that in the next decade, the popular vote might actually swing and go Democratic in a presidential election. It's certainly inevitable when you look at the demographics there. Now, California, currently 55 electoral votes. As I said earlier, 20 of them under this system would have gone to the Republican in 2012. So despite if you actually look into the scholarly research of what would actually happen if you were to do this nationwide, it would be a disaster. And in fact, it would mean that presidential candidates would have to go to even fewer districts and appeal to even fewer states if you were to do it proportionally. But you don't even have to get to that level. Just understand that they're proposing it in a couple of key states to make the presidential elections meaningless.
And the thing that frustrates me the most about this and the voter fraud accusations the Republicans were throwing around during the last election is they are so defiant about their policies. And a lot of their policies, especially their social policies, do not poll well with the American people. We're becoming more and more progressive when it comes to social issues. Gay rights is just one example of that. Instead of changing when it comes to that particular issue or any other social issue that Americans are polling differently on, they're just deciding, you know what, let's throw the election. Let's ruin the democratic process just so we can ensure that our candidates get elected. And that's pathetic and it's sad. And you know what, if they have that mentality, then good. I'm glad that they're being defiant because they're going to continue to get voted out of office.
So this is, I've said this before on the show, I'll just make the point again. The Republicans actually do have ideas, but they're disowning them. Recently they had, for a couple of years, there was a couple of Republican congressmen working on an immigration bill. John Boehner says, we're not bringing it up. And they came, and it's a Republican-based immigration bill, not bringing it up. So now here's the health care. It's their ideas, we're disowning them. So they have no idea. To win that election, it's usually called a battle of ideas, whichever ideas win the game. But they're not. It's not. So now they just have to suppress the vote and gerrymander their ass off because they can't win the battle of ideas without ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah, with fundamentalists, whether it's the Taliban or it's Christian fundamentalists, they often think, well, if I can't beat you with ideas, like the Taliban did with Malala Yousafzai, they say, well, I can't beat you with ideas, so I'm going to shoot you in the face, right? And and with Christians in the country that are fundamentalists, oftentimes they're like, well, I can't beat the atheists in a battle of ideas, so I'm going to just try to legislate that my religion should be intertwined with the government so I get to rule. Because if we're getting into a logical argument, well, I'm not basing my arguments on logic, I'm going to lose, right? So I don't want to get into that logical argument, so I'm just going to say, no, it's a Christian nation. So we got to do it based on my rules. It doesn't matter if they make sense or not, right? And so in this case, what I'm stunned by is Reince Priebus just flat out saying it. Because there's no refs left. The media has totally abdicated their responsibility. And he just said it. He said, let's only do it in the red states. Let's fix the elections, in the blue states, and not do it in the red states. It's one thing if you say it nationwide. And I actually think that there's a good argument to be made for nationwide. And that's a good debate to have, right? That if you said, hey, everybody, we're doing this in every state, and there's a movement to do it in every state at the same time, okay? But you can't do it state by state. And if a Democrat proposed that only Texas do it, I would be against it. I'd say that's fundamentally unfair. You can't do that, right? But these guys, that's what they have left, to your guys' point, Anna and Jimmy, right? All they got left is unfair tactics because they think they can't win the battle of ideas. And they're losing demographically, as John pointed out. They got nothing left, so they got like smoke and mirrors.